Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today we are joined by John Daniel Trask, and he is the CEO of Raygun. So welcome, John Daniel. Maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about Raygun.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me, Jordan. I appreciate it. Yeah, so Raygun is a SaaS business. We're headquartered out of Wellington, New Zealand. And what we do is we help software teams improve the quality of their code. So we started out by selling software crash reporting. So when things break, we record the information and provide it back to the team and help them solve those problems quicker. We also have real user monitoring, which helps track the end user's experience of software. Is it slow? How much buffering? All of those sorts of problems. And lastly, we have an APM product, which analyzes where does all the time go on the server when you're actually browsing websites, again, to help them optimize that experience. So we ultimately are behind thousands of organizations that try and improve the quality of their software experience for you. You probably actually interact with Raygun several times a day without ever knowing we're in the background helping report those.
Okay. What sort of integrations are there that most people might not realize Raygun is in the back end doing its magic?
Well, anything from when you have a pizza, like Domino's Pizza, if you order something online from them, they're tracking things through there if there's any faults, through to back in the day, our biggest ever event was that we were integrated into the HBO streaming service. So we tracked, I think it was 87 million concurrent viewers of the finale of Game of Thrones streamed their performance data through our platform. And so we could help them better understand where are the faults and delays in the HBO network so that they could make that better. So it really is behind the scenes, but we're helping those tech teams really improve the customer experience for their customers.
So obviously everyone would be familiar with Game of Thrones and HBO. Like how does a deal like that come about? How do you partner with a massive company like this and like a piece of history at this point, the Game of Thrones saga?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because we've always taken the approach of build a great product. And if you were to go to the raygun.com website, you'll see it's a free trial to sign up, run it for 14 days. And then if you see value, you put in the credit card and pay, or the trial ends, which is relatively unique in the developer space. A lot of those tools are more freemium. We took the approach of a trial and pay or effectively you're done. And it's actually worked really, really well. And so even with larger organizations like those I've talked about, they often actually come through as start off with an engineer who's got a problem to solve. They give the service a try, and then they find that actually this does the job. And so we actually do convert about 1/4 of all the people who actually ever send data to Raygun become customers.
Okay, very nice. And so, okay, can you go over some of the AI that's integrated into Raygun? And I mean, you don't need to spend too much time on it because we sort of chatted a little bit beforehand, but is there anything you can share about how some of the AI works within Raygun?
Yeah, so there's two arms to AI at Raygun. So firstly, I'm a huge believer in AI. So 2 years ago, for example, I paused the whole company for a week and we had an AI week where every single person in the organization, aside from handling our support load, put down what they were doing, and we really leaned in. So within the Raygun core products, we've added AI features like AI error resolution. And what that does is it means that when you do have this stream of data coming through and something's broken, we can automatically integrate a chat that comes up and tells you what the likely cause of the issue is in your code and helps direct people into fixing them. So even if you're maybe not the world's nerdiest nerd, you could still actually use Raygun to sort of divine what the heck is going on. So that's within the Raygun product. And then what we touched on earlier was that we are gearing up to launch a full agentic AI platform called AutoHive in the next probably 6 weeks. So kind of tackling AI across the board. And as you say, we could talk for hours on that topic if we let ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. And AI is such a hot button topic. Everybody is talking about it. And it seems like every week there's something new that everyone's talking about. DeepSeek sort of came through and revolutionized things. And it almost seems as though we've forgotten about it and we've moved on to the next thing. Where are you seeing some of these AI trends going, and what do you think is the most impactful for software companies right now?
Yeah, so let's break that down. So first of all, I'd say I think that we are actually in what's known as a fast takeoff scenario. So a fast takeoff is like what people imagine with the Terminator movie. Somebody invents AI and then 30 minutes later it nukes us all because we're the enemy. And that sounds terrifying, right? But the reality is I think that the fast takeoff that we're experiencing is actually in the area of innovation. And the piece that's going slow is the human adaptation to what AI is actually providing. So for folks that have been leaning in and playing with these models in recent years, the capability has seen phenomenal improvement in those 2 years. It's the fastest rate of improvement I've ever seen across the tech industry. However, the rollout of that capability hasn't really gone far beyond ChatGPT and people asking questions, maybe summarize some docs. But the capability, like if you think about it as in really abstract terms of this is just intelligence in a box, the way we can apply that is super fascinating. And you mentioned DeepSeek, and that was phenomenal to see the impact within the stock market off the back of that.
Yeah.
And I thought that the response to that was really naive because you would have to, when NVIDIA's stock, for example, started dropping, you would have to assume that we already had enough compute to realize the utopian future of abundance that this could bring in. And I sort of made the joke, I'm like, that would be like, and I'm showing my age here, but that would be like John Carmack, sort of inventing Doom and getting 3D graphics going, and everybody then in 1993 saying, oh, okay, well, I guess we don't need faster computers anymore because somebody made this work one time really efficiently. And in reality, we can scale it up and keep taking it further. DeepSeek, I think, more importantly than anything, put downward pressure on the pricing for these AI models. So my personal view is that within the US, you've got VC dollars driving AI, and now you've got this conflict, which is ultimately AI should be a deflationary category. It should be making everything cheaper. But if you're going to go and put 50 or $500 billion into a company, you've got to be thinking that there's a $1 trillion outcome there, right? And how do you get a $1 trillion outcome out of these things? It's not doing $20 a month subscriptions. And so by DeepSeek coming along and sort of undermining the ability to kind of ratchet the price up as intelligence improves, I think that created a really interesting market dynamic of, we're not going to be able to just overfund this and then rent seek because somebody will just cut the floor out from under us. So that was the more interesting piece to me, seeing China come to the game.
Interesting. I haven't heard that perspective before, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So then bring it. Go on.
I was going to say there's that saying that intelligence that's too cheap to meter, right? So the idea is that it should be so inexpensive to use AI that you wouldn't bother charging for it. Well, how does that work in a world where you're inviting in VC dollars and expecting VC returns? It doesn't work.
Where do you see this trending 5 years from now? I know it's like impossible to look into the crystal ball and make accurate predictions, and so I'm putting you in a tough position. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on where you think AI will be in several years.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see a sort of a bifurcation, a splitting of where AI takes us. I'll break that down as one category is what's our day-to-day changes. And I think that that point that humans actually take a really long time to adopt technology means that our day-to-day might have improved somewhat. We might be leveraging these tools. There might be ambient AIs helping us do various things, but I'm actually not wildly convinced that the general consumer experience will have changed that dramatically. However, on the flip side, which is more around the hard sciences and the really heavy use of AI, I think that will be streets ahead of where we are now. So to give you an example, and this is the type of AI that's not really talked about too much in the mainstream, but you're seeing organizations like Google this year will bring several drugs to testing that are completely synthesized using AI. They also have material-based AIs that are inventing millions of new materials that humans have never encountered or discovered before. We have the protein folding stuff. We have the things that they're now able to completely, I think there was a new model out literally this week that's trained on something like 90 billion or 90 trillion DNA base pairs across all of biology. They're allowing scientists to explore there. So when I sort of talk about that bifurcation, I'm thinking there's one area, which is all of the deep, hard tech science and general innovation that could be moving forward at a really rocketing rate. But then how you and I conduct our daily life might not be that different. It may be that, God, I hope this is true. I would hope that we're starting to see some of the medical advantages trickling out of AI and all of that. To me, as much as we can talk about, hey, I could delegate my boring work. Hey, that's a great immediate win. But the epic win for society is going to be the drug manufacturing, the ability to improve the overall quality of life. And I think that stuff will be starting to hit the market in that 5-year time frame.
Mhm.
To kind of use the old Bill Gates quote, it's people overestimate what can be achieved in 1 year and they underestimate what can be achieved in 10. And so picking 5 was a great way to ask the question.
It's really interesting to hear your takes on AI. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours about it. Yeah, you're obviously incredibly versed. I'm just curious, what was that week that you guys took when AI sort of became pretty prolific that what changed in the company when you took that week to like dive and fully lean into AI?
That's a great question. So let me talk a little bit about how I structured the week first and then the outcomes of it. So here at Raygun, we're a very engineering-led company. We are system thinkers, heavy tilt towards that sort of thinking. And so for the first 4 hours of the first day, and keep in mind, this was May 2023. Sorry. And so what we did was we had the entire company do our software engineering test that we would give to new candidates who were applying for the job. And so this meant, for example, the finance and operations people, the designers, everybody had to do that test. And what stood out to me was that everybody completed the test. And that was the moment where it was like, hang on a minute, I'm not a software developer and I just passed the test for a reasonably hardcore software engineering company. And I think that first aha moment is realizing that your ability to ask the right questions basically can supersede expertise at that point. It was no longer gatekept. And so there was this aha moment initially. Secondly, after we'd done that for the first half of the day, we said, right, we're going to form into cross-functional teams. So not your normal colleagues. You're going to be, again, the finance and ops person with an engineer with whatever. And they formed into teams and they had to build whatever they wanted, but they had to present it at midday Friday. And so I had already sort of set up the environment internally that I'd gone and bought a bunch of 4090 graphics cards so we could self-host models and do stuff inside the building at that point. And the most impressive one, they were all pretty impressive, but by Friday was one team had built, effectively they called it Jarvis, and they could ask questions using speech and it would answer using its voice, but it had analyzed all of the documentation we have from our company manual. So you could say, hey, what's the leave policy here at Raygun? And it would answer and say, you get this many weeks a year and this is the timeline you have to request it and all of that. And it kind of blew my mind because these were people that, again, they're kind of nerdy to be fair, but like they'd started the week without having really used AI much at all. And by the end of the week, they'd actually built like mini products. And that's the thing is, I think we've kind of got it in our head that there's this pace that we all move at that's actually locked to quite an old way of thinking. And so at the end of that week, though, everybody understood what an LLM was. They all understood how they could use it. They could see how these things could be connected together and they could see the real world use inside our own business. And so it was a really critical part of leveling up the team internally. And I'll say back to that point I made about the slow adoption for human beings. I sometimes jump online. You're right. I read just about everything I can about AI. And I can be online and think, oh my God, we've missed the boat. It's all out there. And then you step away and you realize, actually, most people aren't doing very much more than asking 1 or 2 questions of ChatGPT, maybe a day or a week. Yeah. So we've still got this long way to go.
Yeah. I often feel the same, like overwhelming anxiety that the world is changing and I need to catch up and everything is moving and I need to find angles and ways. And then I speak to most people and they're like, ChatGPT, I've used it, I know about it, but and most of the population is like that. Yeah, you're very right. Okay, so then bringing it back to Raygun, what have been some of the biggest challenges in building and growing and scaling Raygun over the last 12 months?
Well, over the last 12 months has been interesting because within the tech industry especially, we've sort of been in the hangover of venture capital. So I will say Raygun is not a VC-backed company, which is probably why we're cash flow positive and profitable. But we didn't play that game. But what we have seen across our industry, keep in mind our industry is quite a horizontal one because there's software teams inside every type of organization, really. But software in general has been in a bit of a downward trend the last few years. I think as a lot of money has dried up out of the economy, that has flowed through into VC pockets. And so plenty of startups that were not viable yet, simply couldn't get follow-on funding. So we'd seen headwinds there, and I was very fortunate that our business was already in a strong financial position when that time came. I feel for everybody that maybe started around that 21, 22 timeframe when I'm sure your listeners are very aware, valuations went insane. People took way more money than they needed and sometimes hung themselves. So a lot of people don't realize that, sometimes you can kill the business by raising the money in the first place. And so we've seen a lot of that across the tech industry as a whole. However, broadly speaking, we've been doing reasonably well. We are starting to see the improvements across the industry. New startups are starting to form. AI has sort of started to get that little bit of maturity that there's some VC dollars rolling in there. We have also had some advantages. We are New Zealand based and we bill all our customers in US dollars. And again, I'm sure your listeners are quite international and understand that I think the US dollar alone is being quite strong as opposed to all the other currencies being quite weak. But that has helped us quite a bit as well, generally.
Okay. And then so who do you think you guys at Raygun serve the best? What sort of customer base is at Raygun?
Yeah, so that point about the horizontal customer base is really interesting. We have generally seen ourselves doing well in the healthcare space. So people that provide healthcare, we do HIPAA compliance and all of the other sort of things that they want to tick. We had mentioned earlier about HBO. We've typically done well with streaming services. What I've noticed is it's predominantly anything that actually typically targets more of the consumer. So there are B2B customers, but the consumer is a much more demanding customer, frankly, than a B2B customer typically is. And so where you have that situation where your customers are being aggressively courted and there are razor thin margins, you definitely don't want your software to be throwing errors at them. You don't want it to be slow as all hell. They won't put up with those things. And so we typically, anything where the consumer is in the mix is important. Similarly, the closer to e-commerce, and I mean e-commerce in the broadest sense, not just a random Shopify store, although we are in the Shopify marketplace as well. But the more closer to a payment moment, the more value that we connect with the customer. So I would make the argument that faults in software anywhere alienate the user. But an example that we would provide to any customer is, well, you'd set up Raygun crash reporting and we'll teach you how to set it up so you can see every error that occurs in your checkout, right? And suddenly it's like, okay, well, I definitely don't want to have an error when somebody's trying to give me money, right? And I think we all, entrepreneurs especially, you sit there and you're trying to pay for something and something's not working and you're like, my God, you're making it hard for me to actually give you money. This is insane. But what I will tell you is there are so many more software faults than people even could imagine. So I'll give you an example. We used to have our smallest plan was 25,000 software errors a month. And the most common engagement conversation we'd have is, that's way too many. Surely I don't have 25,000 errors a month in my software. I'll sign up, pay my $40, get the data flowing. And then it's like 2 weeks later, how the hell have I used up 25,000 errors already?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we see is that most people are actually completely unaware of how buggy software is. It's extremely buggy. We've talked a lot about AI today, but it's the piece that I often find fascinating when I see people go, oh, but AI is not perfect. And I'm like, my gosh, I've got to tell you, being on the receiving end of billions of software faults every month from human developers, I'm not sure we're much better.
That's really interesting. If I probably would have the exact same sentiment if 25,000 faults. What are some other surprising things that people may not realize that happens in the back end of their software then?
One thing is, so take our APM product as an example. Now, this is something that monitors the back end with a profiler. So it's noticing things like your database queries and everything that's going on. Again, really nerdy territory. But what we typically notice is that people will want to implement what's the category we're in is typically called observability. How do you observe the functioning of the software, as the builder of it? And people will typically want to instrument the software, which means go in and sort of go, hey, well, I'll wrap this method and time it and see how long it takes. Typically, when people turn on the APM product, they're often surprised at where the bottlenecks are. And this is actually within the software industry. This is a well-known phenomenon, which is to tell developers that they should use a profiler. And the reason you should use a profiler is because usually where you think the slowdown is occurring is incorrect. Mm-hmm. So relying on the person to guess where the actual slowdown lives is usually a fool's errand. So there's usually a lot of ways you can accelerate software. But showing my age a little bit here, but I've been using computers since I was 8 years old in the early 90s. And you talk to most older people, and they will sort of say it's kind of phenomenal to me that the computer doesn't actually feel any faster. In fact, it often feels slower than it did in like 1996. It used to be you'd open Microsoft Word and that thing was open before you could blink your eye. And now, it's sitting there probably trying to show me OneDrive ads before it actually boots up. And you kind of say, but hang on, isn't the computer like 10 million times faster than it was in 1996?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is it is, but people don't care that much about the software quality. And so we largely have attrited away a lot of the performance benefit for being able to deliver more code or we'll sacrifice it elsewhere. But what that does actually open up is to the software engineers who care deeply about the experience of their software. They can actually make it blazingly fast and make that a differentiator. And I don't know that a lot of people fully appreciate how much having snappy software can actually be quite a qualitative differentiator, because a lot of people won't necessarily remember that when they're deciding why they picked something, but they know that something that feels instant and responsive feels better than something that's slow.
Yeah, again, I've not ever really thought about that, and it's not something you can track. People don't even realize it. Interesting. Okay. So then you mentioned that at Raygun, you guys have a better, the customers that you serve who have a B2C focus on their end typically have a better experience with Raygun. Like, how are you in these customers? How are you finding them, or how do they know you exist?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say all customers, I think, have a generally good time with Raygun. But yeah, how do we get the message out there? We do a mixture of things. So to tell a little bit of the story, originally it was a lot of content marketing. And this was back in my earlier days. Like I said, it was not heavily VC funded. And I got people saying to me, how did you know that content would be like, the next big wave in marketing? And, my answer sounds silly, but it's truthful, is, well, I was broke and I could type for free. So, I could write blog posts. This was before we had, thousands of customers and all of that. And I would just put that content out there, and I would go and share it on various websites, usually, niche verticalized websites about the topics that we could solve for. Over time, as the business grew, we expanded that into obviously traditional paid media as we had the capital to do that. We did do fairly well out of things like AdWords over the years. We also do sponsor a range of things across our industry now. We're reasonably well known, I guess, within the niches in which we operate.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, I do think that there's an element of just time and market for awareness. So we've had some great opportunities. I'll give you an example here, which is Microsoft. So we use Microsoft's .NET and C# language on the back end of Raygun, and they became a customer of ours many years ago. And we ended up doing a case study with them because of the performance benefits that we got out of using .NET. Once you're sitting on the main Microsoft case study site, sort of highlighting the benefits of working together, things like that really resonate with different sort of audiences across the broader market. And so a lot of that social proof comes into play. One thing I've also noticed, I mentioned streaming services that we've done quite well in, and I don't have any evidence to support this, but what I do notice is that if we land a marquee customer in a certain category, over the following 12 months, we will tend to see a bunch of other marquee customers in that category come on board. And I think some of that just comes from the clickiness of various niches and industries, is that these things get talked about. So in some ways, you kind of got to have this core-based marketing engine. You couple that with time in the market. Lastly, and most importantly, is you have to have a product that doesn't suck. It has to deliver value. And that's one thing. We've always had really great metrics around the lifetime of a customer, how long they stick around. The biggest reason people ever churn from our service is either if their company, unfortunately, is shutting down, or there's some sort of roll-up merger and acquisition situation where they are not the dominant player in the roll-up. They're the big reasons, not that the product doesn't work. I'll diverge a little bit from your question to tell you a brief story. I remember we expanded into the United States. So while we're headquartered in Wellington, New Zealand, we do have people around the world. And years ago, I went and set up in Seattle, and I was experimenting with enterprise sales. And I remember we hired this person. We had a range of people, but this person in particular said, I really love working here. I said, why is that? And they said, Well, the great thing is what the website says we do and what the product does are the same thing. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, it's the first place I've worked where that was true. And,
Yeah.
some of that is actually the Kiwi humbleness problem, which is that we don't typically overstate things. We might undersell ourselves. And it was a real eye opener to the American model of just like, massively overstate on the website what the product does. And then hope
Yeah.
like heck the customer sticks around long enough for you to build those things.
It's amazing that if you build a good product that actually does what it says that it does on the tin, and people stick around and they actually enjoy the product. Like, what did you say? The product doesn't suck.
The product can't suck. I mean, there's some things that Elon Musk says that I don't agree with, but he talks a lot about the fact that start with the product and make it remarkable. And I always think about that in terms of product development, which is you really focus on that word remarkable. If people aren't making any remarks, you are by definition not remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you get to that point where you are remarkable? And the reason I sort of subtly touch on Elon there is because he talks about how Tesla does no marketing. And I think it's a little bit dishonest in the fact that it's like, sure, but if the guy running it has 100 million followers, every tweet is marketing, right? So
Yeah.
it's just that it's unpaid.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. So then what are some main priorities for Raygun over the next 12 months for 2025?
yeah, so our big goals are shipping this AI platform for agents, and like I want to be clear, we're not trying to target software developers for that. We want people who are not super nerdy to be able to build and create and find these agents and run them. So we are looking to launch that probably in April this year. You can go to autohive.com and pre-register, or if you're listening to this later, you'll be able to sign up. So that's a really big one. But again, I've built a lot of products, and I know that, you bring something to market and then you start getting the real world feedback, and so you start with a vision, you bring it to market, you find out how miscalibrated your vision was, you adapt to the early feedback and iterate as quickly as possible. I'm also a big believer in sort of striving to get the first 100 customers. The reason for that is that if you've only got one or two, it can be very difficult to understand if the feedback is statistically significant. You need to get it so that 30 of the 100 people have said that this is really important. We should definitely look into that. And do whatever you can to get those first 100 customers on board. Lastly, in the core Raygun business is we're going to bring more of those AI capabilities into the error monitoring, real user monitoring, and APM parts, because we do see the increased automation and the ability to apply fixes and improvement without chewing up a lot of dev team time is a huge win. Developers are frankly very expensive employees. And so the more we can free them up to focus on things like feature development and strategic things within product development, as opposed to just fixing the bugs and trying to iron out issues, the more effective we think we can make our customers.
Okay, makes sense. So then, JD, a question I like to ask, because I'm always surprised at some of the answers that I get, right, are, let's say that you had a magic wand that you could wave over Raygun and you could solve one big problem. What would that big problem be?
It's a good question. I would probably start by saying that I think the Raygun business, first and foremost, is in the best shape it's ever been in right now, which is part of the pause, is to kind of say, we've got a really excellent team right now. Everything's firing pretty well. I would probably say, broadly speaking, would be more clarity on the future of go-to-market. And so the reason I say that is, for example, I mentioned that we do well out of Google AdWords. We've largely seen Google struggling a little bit on that front. And this sort of actually kind of connects in all of the things we've talked about, which is certainly AI, Google, the changes in the industry, all of those things. It's going to be a really fascinating few years in seeing how the evolution of that go-to-market strategy kind of shifts, because a good example is people are seeing the amount of traffic going to read their content is dropping down. However, if one of those content readers is the, say, ChatGPT crawler, and it's regurgitating that it recommends you every time, you don't see that, but it may actually be very good for you. And so I think clarity around where the go-to-market is going broadly would be a really interesting thing to sort of cast a magic wand and get an insight into, well, at the end of the year, what would I think that looks like?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so then I guess on the opposite end, and finally, if you could go back Now that you have hindsight, what are some things that you might change?
But the first company I created was called Mindscape, and we've reused that vehicle, which is why it shows up on LinkedIn as 18 years old. But through
Okay.
that time, we have built New Zealand's largest philanthropic website. We'd built about 6 other businesses. And then Raygun, we actually brought to market in 2013. And it was doing so well that we ended up rebranding the original business interest. But yes, I've been building businesses for 18 years. Some of the things that I would probably look back, let's say for JD and his piece, what advice would I give him? Some of this sounds really trite because they're so cliche. One would be trust my gut more. So the number of times I've seen an opportunity and been talked out of it by people around me and then gone, man, if we'd just gone down that road, that would have been so much better, all the better. Like, I think there was underestimating founder energy, to be honest. It's like you don't start a company because you're a person who's looking in the rearview mirror all day. You start it because you see opportunities and you want to grow, and therefore you try to make and find opportunities. So there'd be some of that. Similarly, when it comes to hiring, there's always this tension between don't let the job ad sit up too long. People might think, that it's fake ad or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like pressurizing yourself to make a hire that's not ideal is also problematic. And so I'm forever trying to work out what are the better filters for hiring, because the people really make the business, they really make the business. And that's why I say, even when you ask the question of what are the things that I would change, I'm like, I don't think I'd change anything really about the people right now. We've got some extremely high performing folks in our business that we all love working together. We're doing really well. There's certainly a lot of things that I would do differently with the benefit of hindsight that probably aren't general feedback points for the audience, and that they didn't perhaps work for the Raygun business, but they might work for any other business. So understanding the dynamics of like where your price point is, who your customer is, all of that sort of stuff. Like our audience, we don't charge $500,000 or $1 million a year because our audience is technical. Like they almost have a problem if they'll try and build things themselves, very uneconomically, even if they, for the wrong reasons, basically, so some of that advice wouldn't necessarily apply. But yeah, trust your gut, both on opportunities and on hiring. Also, don't be afraid to have the difficult conversations. And an early sort of, I guess, principle that I realized is that the more I don't want to do something, the more I need to go and do it right away. That's always a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah, really good advice there. I like what you said about founder energy. I haven't heard that before. So yeah, I really love that.
You typically know if you're demonstrating founder energy because it tends to piss off just about everybody else. And the thing is it's like, well, what's one of the defaults of the entire universe? Well, one of the defaults of the entire universe is to take the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is not change. And so kind of back to that same point of like, well, run at the hard problems is like, do the things that other people don't want to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And you shared some amazing insights today, John Daniel. Thank you so much. If people are listening and they want to check you guys out, or they want to check out Raygun, or they want to connect with you, where can they go and how can they connect?
So I welcome everybody reaching out. I love to engage with folks. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. One benefit of the convoluted first name of John-Daniel is there's not too many of us, so you'll find John Daniel Trask on LinkedIn. If you are a person who prefers the online battlegrounds of Twitter, I am on I guess I should say X, as Trask JD, TraskJD. I use that far too much, but they are my two primary sort of social places that you'll find me and be able to chat. By all means, love to hear from everybody.
Well, I'll make sure to leave links and all of that in the description. And I look forward to seeing AutoHive coming out in April. I'll be following along. And thank you again for your time and some of the amazing insights that you shared today, especially around AI. Certainly haven't heard a lot of them, so I really appreciate our conversation. And thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, everybody.